Good morning, Jonty. It is a pleasure to have you with us and have your presence again, actually, from the webinar series last year. Just a quick intro to Jonty, although Jonty, you can obviously fill in as we go through. So Jonty is a regenerative agriculture farmer in the Cotswolds. He's a Nuffield scholar and has had a life in farming, and is now also a manager at Farm Ed, which is sort of a knowledge exchange farm, a demonstration farm for these new and innovative practices, which we very much hope will become the norm. So Jonty, it's a real pleasure to have you with us this morning. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Yeah, great to have you with us.
Morning, Tim. Morning, everybody.
So the way that we tend to do this is really the first part is really about sort of Jonty's journey to date, what you're up to at the moment, Jonty, and also your vision for the future. So yeah, we'd love to kind of hear your story, how you got into farming, why it's part of, in your blood, what you're really up to at the moment. And yeah, like I say, what is your vision for the future? Where do you see farming going? Where do you see this movement going? So Jonty, over to you.
Crikey, that's a lot of questions, a lot of deep stuff for so early in the morning, Tim.
Opportunity to wake you up, Jonty.
And what I love is seeing all the names come in and all the people that know me too well and have heard my story in various formats. That's always nerve-wracking. Brilliant. So where would you like to start, Tim?
So Jonty, how did you get into farming? Why is it something you're involved in now? What was the initial driver? Where did the passion get sparked back in the day?
I grew up on an arable. Well, it was a mixed farm. I was born in 1969. Can you believe that? 3 elder brothers. Dad was a tenant, and it was a very traditional mixed farm in the when I was growing up through the 70s at least. Some cattle, some sheep, some roots, some arable. About 20 people working on the farm. A range of traditional buildings, small tractors, blah blah blah. Wonderful place to grow up.
Yeah.
But then I witnessed hedgerows being removed, those veteran trees being chopped down to make fields bigger, the ponds being drained, the wet meadows being ploughed up, spraying from the air. I remember helicopters spraying some of the crops discriminately from the air. We were stubble burning. The hedgerows were smashed down to about 1 foot tall, all for commodity production. The cattle went, the sheep went, the grassland went, the pigs went, the workers went. So by about 1985, it was my dad, a part-time farmer at that point, who was also ironically teaching, like I ended up doing as well, with a bit of help from my brothers and me at harvest. And that wasn't an industry I wanted to be part of. I fell out of love with farming at an early age, I guess. I knew there was something different. I knew it had to be different. So I was the annoying youngest brother who started planting trees everywhere in the wrong place and trying to create ponds in the middle of fields when people weren't looking. This is in North Nottinghamshire, not renowned for its dry stone walls, but I started to build a dry stone wall down the edge of a paddock, again, which didn't last very long and got removed about 5 years later by my farming brother who took on the farm as Dad got older. But I knew I wanted to do something different. And I remember I was a bit of a rebel through school, but I remember picking up the book Seeing Green by Jonathan Porritt, maybe about 1985. And that's when Jonathan Porritt was leader of the Green Party and a wonderful spokesman for green politics and the green economy. And that book, Seeing Green, really hit me between the eyes, probably one of my first light bulb moments. It's when I realized that looking after the environment wasn't just about nice things to do and being a tree hugger and being a bit of a hippie and being a bit of a renegade. It was about the economy. It was about good business. If we were going to build a really functioning society and a healthy economy, we had to put nature and value nature and put it right at the heart of everything that we do. And that made it a little bit more interesting for me as I got into my A-levels, I suppose, and wanted a career somewhere in food farming, the land-based sector. So I chose to go to agricultural college, despite the fact that I didn't want to do pure agriculture. I went to Seale Hayne Agricultural College in Devon, which is no more, sadly. It got consumed by Plymouth and disappeared. And I did a degree in rural resource management, one of the first degrees of its kind that I think started to talk about public goods and multidisciplinary land use, and how, of course, food is crucial. Food is at the heart of what we do, but all those other things, recreation, landscape, biodiversity, water, heritage, it was crucial. And so it was a 4-year degree, met a range of wonderful people, many wonderful Seale Haynians out there, like Jake Freestone and Adam Henson, doing wonderful stuff too, my cohort. And it made me realise that I did want to be involved in farming, but not in its traditional sense. So I followed my heart down the conservation route, environmental route, trying to balance food, farming, environment all the time. And my first proper job, after doing that travelling thing and working on sheep stations in Australia and backpacking and odd jobs on dairy farms and root farms to pay the bills, my first proper job was as a FWAG advisor in Lincolnshire. I think I was 23 at the time, 24 maybe, one of the youngest FWAG advisors in the country. And Lincolnshire was a hard county to be a FWAG advisor in, you know, lots of pretty intensive arable farmers. Some bits of wonderful nature were left, you know, particularly in the wold, some wonderful bits of grassland and wetland. It was a tough job, but I loved it, talking to farmers about what they could do. Starting to talk about the economics of it and how it made great business sense. And I remember, I won't mention his name, but the senior farm conservation advisor in Lincolnshire at the time, he said one really important thing to me, which hit home again, probably my second light bulb moment. And he said, when wheat is £200 a tonne, farmers have to farm really hard to make the most of that great profit. Every acre has to be farmed to build up reserves. That's your good year in 3. But when wheat is £90 a tonne, farmers have to farm every acre as hard as possible to make a living somehow. And then, of course, it is. You know, when there's profit, you've got to farm hard to make the most of it. When the profits are small, you've got to farm hard to try and make the most of it. If you are profit driven, or if you are yield focused, commodity focused, and doing the traditional route. So that was probably my second light bulb moment. Yeah, loved being a FWAG advisor. Farm conservation was all the rage, and we were planting hedgerows, we were building ponds, we were re-wetting and flooding areas in Lincolnshire and planting trees. And you might wonder where my surname comes from, Brunyee. It's Dutch. We came over and drained Humberside and Lincolnshire and bits of East Yorkshire and East Anglia. So I've got relatives, farming relatives, turning in their grave as I try and re-wet the ground again and introduce nature back onto the lands they drained. It's quite ironic. So yeah, that was my first steps, Tim, into farm conservation.
Wow. And so, Jonty, so at age 23, you're a FWAG advisor, you're kind of back in doing what you love. You're really starting to kind of create this sort of, bringing nature back into farming. Was that also, I mean, that sounds like it was a transition for you in that you kind of saw that the economics could make sense bringing nature into farming. And I mean, how did that sort of start you on a kind of dedicated career, I guess, in some sense? Like, why was it at that point that you really felt, okay, like this is kind of a message we need to spread, this is what I want to commit myself to? Like, how did that kind of early career experiences kind of reinforce what you knew and kind of get you to dedicate yourself, you know, for the rest of your career into this sort of area?
I think it's always been my passion, and a burning passion to make a difference. It's evident that we're not doing enough. It was evident then that we could throw millions at it through, in those days, countryside stewardship and ESAs, environmental sensitive areas, and lots of European money being thrown at it through the 80s into the 90s, and CAP and the start of cross compliance. We're throwing everything at it, but it still isn't enough. Yeah. We can conserve, we can protect, we can plant some more hedgerows, a few more trees, but that isn't enough. Nearly every metric that you want to take is still negative, whether it's farmland bird numbers, whether it's soil health, whether it's human health, whether it's farmer profit. whether it's community engagement, whether it's landscape quality, nearly all of them are negative at UK level, definitely European level, and definitely at global level. So I realized that conservation was great and I loved it, but we needed to go further. And it's a wonderful industry. There's only farming and forestry that can really make a difference long term to carbon stocks and climate change. So I was in the right place, the right industry, the right messaging, but we had to do more. So I dedicated myself to it, threw myself at it even deeper. I went from FWAG to being a National Trust advisor, and I ended up being the sort of advisor for Northern England and Northern Ireland for National Trust, so working with one of the biggest landowners in the country and working with tenants and ag policy back in the 2000s, which was wonderful. But it got to me that why am I spending all my time and energy trying to advise, encourage, working with knowledge exchange with other farmers, which is brilliant, but why don't I practice what I preach? Yeah. So following cap reform and decoupling, 2002, 3, 4, that sort of era, quite a few farmers were getting out. You know, we've just come out of foot and mouth. There was still a bit of BSE about. Farming maybe wasn't in a great place. But I saw that as a chance to get back into practical agriculture. So quite a few tenancies came up around that period. There was quite a bit of a land churn. So I was very lucky. I applied for a National Trust tenancy down here in the Cotswolds, Connigree Farm, where I am today. Big business plan, interviews, very rigorous process. And Connigree Farm, it was let as a part-time farm on purpose by the National Trust. They wanted someone to come in who could bring this range of skills and passions and ideas about multidisciplinary land use onto a 180-acre farm, but not farm it too hard. So on purpose, it was let as a part-time unit. I always had to have another job. That was part of the contract. So I was very lucky. I won that tenancy 2004, 2005, moved down here with the family and started to practice what I preach, and then made all the errors. And I'm still making errors today and still learning today about how to put stuff into practice. But that was about me going from conservation, getting into sustainable agriculture, whatever that means, protecting resources for tomorrow maybe, and actual practical delivery on the ground and trying to demonstrate what can be done. And I think that has the big impact, showing people. It's all right talking, advising, mentoring's wonderful. Agri-environment and stewardship schemes are carrots and sticks, but showing people how to do it and sharing the highs and lows is really powerful. And I think that's where I am today, really.
Brilliant, Jonty. So all of that kind of you'll know how from being brought up on a farm and kind of reinstating walls and planting trees, and then really getting out and being an advisor, and then realizing, you know, through the National Trust experience that you wanted to actually get back into practical farming. How is that kind of like really refined and honed your knowledge and experience such that you can give better advice today? Like, do you think that actually being a practical farmer has really, you know, now you're like, oh, you know, I was advising people on those things, actually maybe they weren't the best, now I've done it firsthand properly and I've made the errors, like the quality of the advice that you give has kind of increased? Like, yeah, how has your kind of perception of farming changed as you've come back in and been a practical farmer?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is, you know, I'm still learning. I'm still a novice, and I get lots of things wrong. I don't have the knowledge, the skills, the energy, the money to do half the things that I'd love to do and to demonstrate. How have things changed? Well, I think I touched on it from conservation, you know, sort of that farm conservation thing, to trying to think about sustainability and think further ahead about resources. So I remember when soil, air and water really started to be part of what we talked about as an advisor. Moving to a regenerative approach. I think it was about 10 years ago that I started to think a little bit deeper about how do we rebuild, enhance, improve, go deeper. And that's when I realized that we can have prescriptions and schemes and grants and advice, but then it's about mindset. How do we change people's mindset so that the change is deeper and comes from within? because that's the only way we'll get proper transition. People have got to want to do it. It's got to be in your heart. And how do you instill that? How do you foster that? So I think probably the second part of my career has been more about that. So I went from the National Trust, got the tenancy at Conigry, started practicing what I preach a little bit. Some consultancy with a company called Cumulus Consultants, who are wonderful, and we started to do lots of things around natural capital and valuing the environment and some social science. And then ended up teaching. I ended up at the Royal Agricultural University. That was about 8 years ago now. And I wanted to give back to the younger generation and think about mindset. So I was the program manager at the RAU for the MSc in business management. I was the farm business management lecturer. But I started to bring other things in. I started to link farm business management to food chains, farm business management to agritourism, to sustainability, to regenerative approaches, and try and link it holistically all together through my teaching. So I had a wonderful 6-7 years at the RAU, met some wonderful students, and I can see some on the participant list today. Hopefully inspired a few, probably pissed a few off as well. Got everyone out and made it muddy boots and did case studies and tried to introduce a different way of learning. Yeah, wonderful, loved it. And that's really when I realized that mindset, knowledge exchange, inspiration has to go hand in hand with practical information and advice.
Amazing. And that probably leads us on to a very good transition towards Farm Ed and where you are today with Farm Ed, because it sounds like that journey you've been on to date, from being brought up on the farm and, really seeing in your heart the damage that was done from maybe we call poor farming or, extractive farming, and the damage that did. And now all these journeys, the experiences you've had over the time, now it feels like it's all crystallizing back into Farm Ed, like in a way, kind of the best of the best. And yes, of course, we're all still learning, but yeah, Jonty, could you tell us a little bit about Farm Ed and the projects you're working on there and what Farm Ed really stands for?
Absolutely. So if you've not seen it yet, do Google Farm Ed, Farm capital ED, with the Centre for Farm and Food Education in the Cotswolds. The parent company was Cotswold Seeds, Ian and Celine Wilkinson. They bought the farm, Honeydale Farm, 7-8 years ago. And they knew also, similar to me, that it was about inspiration and knowledge exchange and demonstration. So they bought the mind. Ian and Celine, just similar to us, they know we have to have a big transition in the sector if we're going to save us and save the planet, I guess. So they built Farm Ed. Farm Ed is now a CIC, a community interest company, effectively a charity. And we work to demonstrate agroecological regenerative approaches, lots of knowledge exchange events. We can do mentoring and advice too. And we can celebrate. We like to get people together when we're allowed to walk the farm, to see our 8-year diverse rotation of herb-rich lays, heritage wheats, cover crops, etc., sainfoin, permanent pasture species-rich meadows, wetland, forestry, agroforestry, market garden, bees, all sorts of things on farm. Real diverse system. And we're trying to show what can be done on 107 acres. It's not a massive farm. And we've got events such as agroforestry workshops. We've got holistic management training, 12 days coming up. We've got Oxford Real Farming Conference in the field. Practical workshops on soil, on species ID, on dung beetles, on carbon, all sorts. Really exciting. So do check Farm Ed out. But it's all about inspiring and getting people together. We sort of launched about a year ago. A soft launch. We had lots of wonderful people through the door. Our audience, and this is crucial, Tim, our audience is everybody.
Yeah.
You can't just speak to farmers and landowners and advisors. We have to speak to children, our local community, teachers, students at the unis, researchers, farmers, landowners, foresters, market gardeners, agronomists, land agents, politicians, the whole range, chefs, foodies. So we've got courses and events set up for all of those audience types. So we can try and join some of the dots and get different people in the room as well. And not to forget financiers and bankers. Because if we are going to get true transition, we need a slightly different or a big change in our financial model. Green recovery funding, public money for public goods, etc. So yeah, so do have a look at FarmEd, lots of exciting stuff happening. And we will have a relaunch soon when we're allowed.
Amazing, John. And so that sounds so powerful. So FarmEd is really, that center, I guess, maybe mindset shift across the entire sector, right? And what I get from what you're sharing is that farming, as you said right at the beginning, underpins economies, right? You know, land and farming, and it underpins economies, it underpins societies, it underpins cultures. It probably underpins a huge amount about the way we see ourselves as well as people, especially in terms of our connection with nature. I mean, could you share a little bit more about that kind of range of people that are participating in the FarmEd sort of project? What is it that they're sort of getting from it? Is it predominantly their mindset? Is it predominantly paradigm? Is it practical know-how? Is it part of networking? Like, what is it that they're all taking away from the experience of coming to FarmEd?
Great question. Every farm and every farmer and every farming family and every community is different.
Yeah.
And we must respect that. So whatever schemes, policies we come up with, they're going to be blunt.
Yeah.
So we have to work very much at personal level, one-to-one, face-to-face, small groups, workshopy stuff, imagination workshops, and give people space to explore what they want, what they need, what they can do. So the feedback we've had already from some of our work at FarmEd, some people just want to see what can be done. And they're very quiet and they just see some practical stuff on the ground. And that's enough for them. Might get one light bulb moment when they see the worms falling out of the herb-rich ley when we dig the pit. Some people need more confidence that they're not the only regenerative agroecological farmers out there, because it can feel very lonely. Very often we're sat in our small or medium-sized farms and we've got wildflowers here and this, that, there, and it looks different. And you look over the wall or the fence to the bright green farm next door, and we sometimes feel, what on earth are we doing? We're not producing as much ryegrass as the neighbour, and my cows aren't as big as the neighbours, and our wheat yields are less when we're growing heritage wheat than my neighbours. I feel a rubbish farmer, and we can plummet. I'm sure lots of people on this call feel that sometimes. We're taking risks, we're innovators, we get lots of things wrong, and it can feel very lonely. So some people come to FarmEd for that reassurance, that confidence, and that sharing experience. Some people are just searching out hard data, and they want knowledge, and they are hoovering it up, whether it's face-to-face or webinars or podcasts or research papers. It's crazy. So everyone is different. Some people just want to celebrate as well around food and share the bread over a long table and talk. So everyone is different, and everyone's getting different learning impact out of the work we're doing.
And how do you see that model evolving? So within FarmEd, the relaunch, how do you see that model evolving over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years time, and really sort of shifting maybe the perception of farming, or even just kind of creating that snowball effect? Oh, it's not weird to do something slightly different, and here are all the benefits, both economic and social. How do you see the journey unfolding for FarmEd and the movement you're creating, Jonty?
FarmEd's one small piece of the jigsaw, of course. I think I'm going to blame lockdown. I've never known such a crazy period in food, farming and the environment. I think it's because we've all been sat at our computers for the last 12 months, 8 hours a day, new partnerships. Everyone's been listening to podcasts, webinars, delivering some great stuff, reading books by Gabe Brown, left, right and centre, occasionally getting out for a farm walk, but also sitting down and asking, what do I want from my farming business? What can I do differently? And actually taking time to take a step back, because we've had a bit more time on our hands. So the transition is well underway, Tim. It's been building slowly for a few years, but the last year or two particularly have been absolutely bonkers. It's now not just mad farmers like me talking about this stuff. Everyone I bump into is trying something wonderful. Every farmer is now planting trees or trying min-till or integrating livestock back into their system. Agroforestry springing up left, right and centre. Most farmers now are talking about soil and looking for worms and thinking about organic matter. So the transition is well and truly happening. And interestingly, it's happening without policy change. This isn't top down. This is bottom up change. It's groundswell. You know, the best event in the year, groundswell, Oxford Real Farming Conference. It's all bottom up stuff. Pasture Fed Livestock Association, all the great work the PFLA are doing. It's all bottom up stuff. And that's happening now. And that is going to continue. FarmEd's role is small in that. You know, we link people together. We'll help with knowledge exchange. I'd love to see a network of FarmEds. And we are talking to others about how we can link, and lots of co-curation. We've even had some inquiries from America. How can we have an American FarmEd? But we're already working with partners such as the Rodale Institute in America too. But maybe we can take it into Europe. So yeah, it's just so busy and so exciting. And the key is, Tim, is it regenerative, agroecological, holistic, permaculture, organic, farming with nature? Call it what you like. I'm not too fussed about labels. It's about change. So all farmers doing something different, and as long as they are putting biodiversity or nature at the heart of what they do and they truly get it, then we're making big positive steps.
Amazing, Jonty. I've got a million questions about everything you just said. So I'm just trying to think what's the one that's probably most useful and relevant. So we'll get to it in just a second, actually, but with our family farm here, but how are you thinking at the moment that you can make the farm ed model accessible to others? And if another farm, or maybe it is the perfect time to transition, the next section is asking about how, ideas and thoughts you have about helping farmers like ours, Norney Farm, 90 acres in Surrey, like how could we, and we've talked about this, Jonty, how could, what's your advice for a farm like us, or for, people with farms who are thinking about making this transition? Like, what advice would you give them? And could it be, guys, here are some elements of farm ed, or would you like to be a partner with farm ed? Like, what advice would you give to the everyday farmer that wants to transition?
Okay, there's about 3 questions there, all
Sorry.
in one.
At least it wasn't a million.
Where to start? Transition, your 90-acre farm, the family farm, Tim. I would turn it straight back to you or anyone else on the call. What do you want? What do you want from your farm? Do you understand that? What makes you smile?
Yeah.
So with 90 acres, you could do all sorts of things. You could farm it really hard if you want and try and make a living, but you won't. You could turn it all over to rewilding nature if you wanted to, if that's your passion. You could let it to somebody else and not worry about it.
Yeah.
You could develop an education centre and work with someone like FarmEd. And we could have a network of FarmEds across the UK, maybe sharing speakers, courses, modules, co-curating stuff, franchising in a way. That might be quite nice, because we will have our biggest impact in our farming community, in our valley, with our farmer cluster group, within an hour maybe of FarmEd. So that others could maybe do the similar across the UK and could work together. Or you could farm high value produce. The best farming decision that we've ever made here, Mel and my wife, is to sign a joint venture with a young grower and start a market garden. The 3-acre market garden is now turning over more than the rest of the other 173 acres put together, and feeding 60 families with 50 different fresh vegetables, fruits, herbs, and salad crops. So you could go that route, more high value, nutrient dense food. So lots of things you could do with your 90 acres, Tim, or your 250 acres out there, people. But what do you actually want to do? And that comes back to a holistic approach, holistic planning, working out what makes you smile and tick.
Yeah.
And it won't be, probably, always commodity production and maximum yield.
Jonty, that's great. And actually just you sharing it like that, it kind of reminded me of what you said earlier, that one of the sort of services, I guess, that FarmEd offer is a mentorship sort of service. And is this the kind of thing that, someone like you, Jonty, would kind of hold our hand as we think through some of these things? And, is that kind of also the soft support that you guys are looking to give or do give?
Yeah, events, get people together, and then we get lots of people coming back, can you help me now one-to-one on farm? And we can do that either in small groups or come to your cluster group, to your region, or face-to-face on your farm. We've got limited capacity at the moment. We're extremely busy, but we're going to grow that capacity. And just to mention one project, if you're in Gloucestershire, we've got the GREAT project we're about to launch in partnership with FWAG, funded by the 30 Percy Foundation. We're working with the PFLA, the CSA Network, the Royal Agricultural University and Gloucester Wildlife Trust on it. And within that, we've got money for some mentoring and nurturing. So the whole project is about making Gloucestershire the regenerative county. We're going to do that by building evidence, getting out there, giving advice to farmers, taking soil tests, looking at biodiversity outcomes, natural capital assessment. Training needs analysis will be leading into knowledge exchange work, workshops, one-to-ones, nurture, and then into nurturing new enterprises. And that'll be enterprise boot camps. We've got money for a fresh start program for young farmers trying to get into the industry, and mentoring of about, I think, 20 mentoring places. And that will be some farm ed stuff, some FWAG mentoring, and one or two others. We're also working with Rural Link, the military charity on that one, about mentoring and training the trainers and training advisors and conveners. Because we need great people on the ground who can advise and convene and facilitate.
Yeah.
So that's another role that Farm Ed's taking.
Amazing, Jonty. So, and it sounds like, you know, with that kind of project, you know, if that was happening in Surrey, gosh, how much easier it would be for our family farm to transition, or at least have that support network to make those steps. And I think maybe that's quite an important point, actually. Without the wider support network, the transition is much harder. It takes much more effort to make a transition if you don't have a support network. So I can really hear that, you know, if these networks, county-wide networks, were to establish and become, you know, accessible by the everyday farmer, gosh, I mean, that would transition a movement. And again, that might be a good way of segueing into the next piece of the conversation, which is, Jonty, one of the questions we ask is, you know, with the massive change that's happening now, the transition towards elms, whatever that might look like, the natural capital market, as we've sort of said, that this idea of the transition to sort of more regenerative practices, and is, what do you think needs to be done now to really support the UK to turn or elevate into a case study for the rest of the world as to how farming and land management should really be undertaken?
I guess if it's a case study should tell the highs and the lows and should tell the story. So I think authentic, we need an authentic approach, a transparent approach, and a diverse approach. To be an exemplar, I go back to, as long as we embed natural capital, nature value into everything we do, and we do it properly and deeply, following a true cost paradigm, so that everything is costed out properly and reflected, say, in food costs or payments for public goods. And as long as we respect food and food nutrition as well alongside that, then I think we can be an exemplar.
Yeah.
Now, we're in danger, of course, politically, of trying to please everybody, which I think politically will always be the case. So maybe elms and future British agricultural policy will have to sit in the middle. So it's up to people like us, bottom up, to make the real difference. Now, we can achieve quite a lot through policy and prescription and payments for public goods, but the real deep change has to come from the farming businesses themselves, despite policy. But also, we're a small country, Tim. You know, I get a bit peed off sometimes when we face this pressure of how are we going to feed the world? It's not our job to try and feed the world. Our job is to try and feed our communities, to protect our environment, to lock in our carbon, become carbon neutral, to respect our culture and heritage, and hopefully there's some left to export too.
Yeah.
But we need to optimize our outputs and outcomes from our land. Not always about maximum commodity and exports and trying to, we can't feed everybody. We can share lessons, we can support others to do that, but we've got a pretty special environment in the UK which we must protect. And also, because we're a small country, we're quite a rich country still. We were just about yesterday anyway. We can take some risks. We can innovate. We can do things differently. We should do that. So I think those three things will hopefully make us an exemplar.
Amazing. And just to come back to the point you made earlier about the project in Gloucestershire. So this kind of bottom-up approach and this idea of, it being, farmer-led basically, and that ideally having a positive impact in policy, and hopefully Elms gets molded around what people genuinely want, and it's really a grassroots project that's supported by government. Is there like real tangible stepping stones, Jonty, that you can see? Is it sort of county-wide networks? Is it about sort of franchising the farm-ed idea? Like, what are the scalable like stepping stones that we could practically take to try and bring this into kind of reality sort of on a wider level?
I'm a big fan of cluster groups, so we've just set up a new cluster group around farm ed, and that sort of grew organically, really. A group of farmers around us, we were chatting over coffee. We started to do a few things on the ground. We started to look at pollinators and how we could spread, share wildflower seed just in our valley. It became very evident very quickly that if we worked together as a group of 20, 40, 60, maybe 100 farmers in the valley, maybe the Evenlode Valley, the northeast Cotswolds, we can have great impact. And there's lots of wonderful people there doing wonderful things already that we didn't know about. So we've come together as a cluster group with some really ambitious objectives. Not just about, say, farmland birds or landscape recovery. This is deep. This is going into enterprise and mindset and reconnection with the communities around us. Maybe even food entrepreneurship. Let's not forget entrepreneurship here. That's crucial.
Yeah.
So I think one step changes, and one thing that is scalable is the cluster group and facilitated cluster group approach. I think making sure that Elms is flexible to fit local circumstance and local need will be crucial.
Yeah.
Knowledge exchange.
Yeah, and I wonder, Jonty, because this is always something I'm curious about, is within Land Management 2.0, we've obviously got a really rich and diverse network now, and spans the countries. Also, maybe I sometimes think, oh gosh, what more could we do to support these movements? And what types of information could be shared? What types of groups could be facilitated? What types of conversations could be catalyzed? And I mean, is there anything else that because kind of what we're up to quite intimately now? I mean, is there anything you can see, Jonty, that maybe we could do to also support this? And have you got any thoughts and ideas on that, actually?
I mentioned entrepreneurship. I think that's key. We need shorter supply chains.
Yeah.
Bottom up stuff again. We can grow regenerative produce tomorrow, and we're starting to do that, more of us, but we need to be able to sell it locally. It's not always about shareholder value. The farmers need to make some more profit here too to reward all the hard work.
Yeah.
So you could, and we could as a group, do a little bit more about enterprise and entrepreneurship and mindset and routes to market.
Yeah.
Because that's key. And of course, we can't. We could come up with some wonderful routes to market, but we need infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Patrick talked about it last week. Abattoirs.
Yeah.
We need local bakeries. We need local mills milling our heritage wheats or regenerative wheat. We need bakers and cheesemakers locally. We need that infrastructure that we can link into. The abattoirs currently being the one that we're all struggling with.
Yeah.
So it's across the supply chain. We can grow the stuff, we can farm well, but we need to link out and reach it all the way back to consumers and our communities.
And actually, I do have a question before we transition into the Q&A. Is so, Jonty, you saying that the market garden that you've got on the farm now, feeding, I think you said 60 families or so, you having a direct connection to your customer, what's your perception of kind of the changing customer demands for local food and nutrient dense food? Can you see the customer demand for food swaying over the next, say, 5 years?
There has been a massive change. I mean, it's been growing anyway, the support and demand for local food and for authentic stories and getting closer to the food that's produced. I've been selling meat direct from the door for 15 years. and it's never been so busy. When we started selling meat, there was probably 2 or 3 people doing it locally. There's now probably 20 people doing it locally, and we're all selling out.
Wow.
And now all of quite a few of us are now developing market gardens, whether they're commercial market gardens or CSAs, community supported agriculture schemes, and we'll all be selling out.
Yeah. Wow.
So the change is happening. COVID and lockdown, I think, increased that change and speeded it up a bit.
Yeah.
The challenge now is, can we keep hold of our customers? It's going to be there is going to be more competition in the market. Probably the biggest recession we've ever seen coming. The supermarkets will grab people back and they'll have loyalty, etc. So how do we keep that going into the future?
Yeah,
that's the big challenge, and that will face us. The challenge here at Conigry is to do that as well.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, and I was just thinking with the point you made about the farming clusters, and if they can create, if more brand recognition can be created around this cohesive network of farmers working towards a common objective, I mean, maybe that could kind of create a bit of a local movement. Is that the group of farmers in a region and the consumers, or people, us, can all kind of hold each other together and start to build in new projects. And I can just see we've got to transition onto the Q&A now, and I can see Paul Barnes, one of our speakers from a couple of weeks ago, who talked very eloquently about all of this and building new enterprises. So Paul was trying to transition, or is transitioning, from having 3 enterprises on their estate, South Ormsby, to having 50. And so creating space for new entrepreneurs to build businesses within the estate. So, I just saw that Paul has written a message. So now is probably a moment to transition to Q&A. So let's do that. So Ashley asks, Jonty, could you comment on the economics of transition to regenerative farming and how best to de-risk the process? This is a great question. Is it essential to incorporate some form of diversified enterprise for the numbers to work? Very good question, Ashley.
Great question. Risk of being regen. If you think about where regen truly came from, it came from, well, a bit of Africa, but let's go back to North America, the Gabe Browns, etc. of this world. There were farms on their knees. They had no money left for inputs and fencing and machinery and buildings. It was a bit of a last resort, really, to reduce fertilizer costs. Didn't have any money for expensive seed. Sold some machinery. Couldn't fence the farm. So by accident, not by accident, but by following a low-cost approach, they got into regen that way. So if you think about de-risking your business, if you could start cutting costs, it economically makes sense. Now, yields may go down a bit initially, but when you get it right and your soil starts to flourish and you've learned a few lessons and your cover crops are working, then hopefully yields will be the same, if not a little bit higher, for lower input costs. So that's a win-win. De-risking is about taking one step at a time, learning from others, getting off farm, see maybe what works on your neighbouring farms and in your community, trying a few things, maybe at smaller scale first, and seeing how comfortable you are with it. Can never de-risk anything. I think by having a complex and diverse system, you spread the risk. So introduce some livestock, have a different range of arable crops, more diverse rotation. You're spreading the risk then. You're becoming more resilient as well to dry summers or dry springs, etc., or wet harvests. Diversification is not for everybody. It definitely helps. We're a very diversified farm at Conigry, with a market garden and a livery and a pop-up shop and a wedding business, as well as pasture-fed beef, lamb, some pork, a few eggs, and some consultancy. So spreading yourself thinly can be one way of de-risking. But there's lots of different ways of de-risking. There isn't one simple answer there.
Perfect. And I think, actually, Ashley, on that point, I think the more that we can foster these conversations, as Jonty said, and kind of create more knowledge exchange and just giving people space to share, and maybe we should start doing some kind of we thought about this idea of having sort of evenings with this kind of community sharing kind of thing, and I wonder whether we start to put something like that on just to help people share ideas. But Jonty, that's brilliant advice. Next question is we've got from Helen. So Helen has been a conservation advisor for as long as Jonty, and the last 2 years have been, a massive mindset change, being led by the next generation of farmers. Young people coming into farming, wanting to do things differently. How do we make sure these youngsters have the access to the knowledge and experience to sustain and grow this mindset change and become influencers of the future in enough numbers to turn things around?
Good question. I think first one is access to land. I think we need more land churn, and maybe the golden handshake might help open up a bit more opportunity for young and different farmers coming into the industry. I think there's more scope, things like joint ventures, where you share a bit of risk with others. So young people can come in, buy some electric fencing, 30 cows, you're in business, but you're not taking all the risk. The mindset, the mentoring, the celebrating, the coming together, so you don't feel alone, is crucial. Yeah. I think there's a big role for universities here as well. Some of the ag courses are a little bit traditional, so I think the universities have to play catch up a tad with what they're teaching and the programs. And then the final bit, and there's lots of bits, but one of the crucial bits is reward. There has to be financial reward at the end of this too. We can all do it because we love it and it's in our hearts, but there has to be profit. So hopefully ELMS and food system change and food pricing and shorter routes to market can help make sure there's profit in for all the hard work that these young folk will be putting in. Otherwise, it won't last. It won't be deep change.
Perfect. Yeah, I think, and it's all part of that movement, isn't it? How do we localize this profits, the supply chains? How do we make sure there's profit in the system? People are valuing food and farming, and ideally the regenerative agriculture practices, whatever we want to call them, practices, reduce the costs and kind of open up the margins that are available. Plus the diversified enterprises give profit in different areas of the enterprise, not just solely focused on one product. So that's fascinating to think through how all of those points you made from that answer and the one before combined to kind of really help stir up a new market. So that's brilliant. Perfect. Paul, who I was mentioning earlier, so Paul asks, how much has being a Nuffield scholar changed your mindset on your day-to-day role? And we talked about this before we started, didn't we, Jonty? And yeah, I'd actually love to hear your thoughts on this.
Paul, thank you for that. Really important to my development. So I was a Nuffield scholar, 2015 scholar. And the first thing to mention is it's about getting off of farm and out of your echo chamber. So Nuffield allows you, maybe for 6-8 weeks to travel, go and see stuff across the globe. So I spent 3 days with Joel Salatin. I was in Romania on market gardens, looking at true agroecological diverse farming at small scale. Canada at market gardening and urban gardening. I went to China, I went to Hong Kong, I went to Italy to look at agriturismo, trying to link it all together. But the first thing, it's just about getting away from the farming business, the farming family for a proper bit of chunk of time, meeting inspiring people, meeting different people, maybe even in different industries. It doesn't always have to be in the farming and food industry. So it was a step change for me. I came back wanting to make a bigger difference and wanting to lead that change. So when I did get back from my Nuffield, I stepped up and I volunteered to become a director of the Pasture Fed Livestock Association to do more teaching and inspirational stuff at the RAU, to develop some new practices on the ground at Conigry and be more regenerative at the home farm. And ironically, I've got my the 8 conclusions from my Nuffield in front of me. So they're already 5 or 6 years old. I'm going to read them out and I'm going to see if these still hold true. I recommended from my Nuffield to the farming industry that, number 1, we must tell our story and celebrate our industry. I think that still holds true. I love that one. That's farm ed for you. Number 2, we must put soil health first. Cool, definitely. Number 3, celebrate the role of small farmers. Yeah, this isn't always about big agribusinesses. Us 90-acre, 250-acre farmers are crucial in this. That's where most food is produced, on small farms at the end of the day. Number 4, we must nurture people. And that speaks back to the last question too. Number 5, we must seek outcomes, not outputs. We must seek effectiveness, not efficiency. Yeah, I don't like the word efficiency. I prefer effective farm businesses. Number 6, we must build diversity and complexity. Absolutely, that's at the heart of regen. Number 7, we must move to regenerative agricultural systems. And number 8, we should follow a true cost paradigm. So I think all those lessons and those things that I came out with are still true, if not even more so.
Jonty, I think there's such incredible, almost insights into your experience from traveling around the world. Because if that was also what you picked up from your experiences from around the world, it shows how universal they are and actually how much they're going to fuel kind of whatever the next phase is, which actually brilliantly takes us on to the next question. Someone asks, how scalable do you think regen ag is? To what extent could it be bigger for conventional growers to go down this route without us needing to replace yields and with imports, therefore exporting our environmental impact? So extreme example, but if everyone converted to market gardening, we'd still need wheat from somewhere.
Okay, there's probably two bits of that. It's already happening at scale. You know, the small farmers like us doing it, but some of the biggest arable farmers around here are now well on the regenerative journey, and they're still growing lots of wonderful cereals and arable crops and roots, and you know, commodity production too in a regenerative way. So it's totally scalable. You only have to look at America. General Mills, you know, working with all their farmers to be regenerative. So your Cheerios will be regenerative next year. So it is and can be done at scale. Moving to market gardening, well, that's not for everybody, and that can't be done on every acre. But let's say there's a 3-acre market garden in every parish feeding the village. That's all we're asking for. And also think about that food being more nutrient dense, so that we actually can use a bit less land for our nutrient needs, which might free up more land for nature and rewilding. So there's another angle to the market gardening horticulture bit. Look at Holland. They're not daft. They've got a wonderful economy because of high value produce. You can learn a lesson from that too, from an import-export point of view. So it can be done at scale very easily, and it is being done at scale.
Brilliant. And there's another question, sort of talking about large-scale contractors to manage land, and often their economic model, it's commodity-driven. Can these highly commercial systems evolve to be more regenerative? And actually, I've even got a point on that. So we've got an upcoming webinar series. We've got Charlie Steer from Grosvenor Farms presenting on that, and they are incredibly, as you can imagine with Grosvenor Farms, incredibly large-scale, and it's commercial, but it's all done in a regenerative systems way. It's absolutely amazing to talk to Charlie and hear how he's doing it. He's also another Nuffield scholar. But yeah, Jonty, is there anything you could say about kind of that large scale sort of contractors, maybe slightly more commodity driven, and can they be regenerative practices?
Yeah. Wonderful, really important question, because again, we're around us with lots of contractors and contract farms. But I now know of some regenerative contractors. They've got the right kit and the right mindset. So it is starting to happen, but it's up to the landowners really to make it happen and to push it and to set those objectives. And it doesn't have to mean less profit. It should mean more profit if you get it right. So it's a no-brainer. It's a win-win. But the contractors they need mindset change. They might need some different equipment, and it might not be arable every year. So you might have a diverse 8-year rotation, and the arable contractor's doing 4 years, and then your grazing contractor might be doing 4 years on the herb-rich lays, mob-grazed cattle, sheep, etc., through the system, building fertility for you, and a joint venture. So maybe a slightly different approach to contracting and working with others.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I can imagine that Groundswell is probably creating a big shift in the way contractors approach their business as well. You know, Groundswell is such a great sort of arable kind of movement as well for Regen Ag, and I can imagine huge amounts come from that. So great question. The last one that we have is from Nathan, who is actually going to be on our interview with next week. And Nathan asks, have you ever experienced moments of real doubt about what you're doing, Jonty? And how have you dealt with that?
Constant doubt, yeah. Yeah, every day I think I've got something wrong. I'm pretty thin-skinned. Try different things. Most of them don't always go very well. We have to learn by our mistakes. So you get up tomorrow and do it again. Try something different, but follow your heart as well. And it's okay to make mistakes. That's not a problem. yeah, I'm always doubting stuff. Yeah,
But
I'm not as confident as I seem.
No, Jonty, this is great, because I think actually, the point you've been touching on through the whole conversation we've had is about kind of creating a diverse, resilient system, and that's of course on a farm, but also as part of a community and part of a, even a region like a county. So yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, any kind of support structures that we can support to put in place to help people go through these transitions and learn from one another, make less mistakes, that's really what this is all about. So Jonty, well, we've come to the end of the interview now. We're nearly at 9:30, and I mean, it's just been absolutely fascinating. I've written loads of notes. There's so much to think through on this, and I think the stories and messages you've shared are so critical at this incredible change. And I think, everything you've shared is absolutely, practical and applicable for every farmer, irrespective of scale, size, location, geography. So thank you for sharing such a kind of a principle-led and sort of heartfelt set of kind of insights from your experience. So Jonty, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning.